now they're trying to pass this Pass ID Act, and I bet the same sort of thing will happen. We've started to see even legislation that hasn't been passed yet. They're already preemptively nullifying it. I mean, that's one type of preemptive war we can support. Virginia, by a very wide margin, their legislature just passed a measure, in effect saying that nobody in this state is going to be penalized for the high crime of not purchasing a health insurance policy that meets with the approval of the federal government. So this is going on, there's the thing that had the New York Times so upset was that people are proposing doing this with cap and trade, and just saying, look, you know, we've argued with you people, we've elected people, we've tried everything, but at this point, enough is enough. You're obviously not obeying the Constitution, and in fact, they know that. That's why when people say, oh, we have a living Constitution, that's their way of saying, yeah, we are violating the Constitution, we're just making up a new one. I mean, you know, this living Constitution thing, try doing that in the middle of a game of poker. No, my 2-pair beats your royal flush. Because it's a living poker game. Like, no, this is absurd. And so the states are finally saying, look, we've tried everything. We have been more than reasonable. Now we're just not doing it. Now, we've got in California, because we get this objection, well, you know, couldn't the federal government just crush them somehow? Well, yeah, I suppose if it came to that, they could roll tanks into California and take everybody's marijuana away, you know, if that's what they want to do. However, I don't think you're going to find that many Americans who are so brainwashed that they would fire on their fellow Americans over that. I mean, like a sick person who's wasting away without medicinal cannabis, I don't think is going to be shot by another American, I hope. But the point is, yeah, of course they could do that. They're not going to. But you could say, well, couldn't they just cut off federal funding to states that resist? Well, a couple things I would say about that. Number one, if enough states do it, then they're going to start getting ticked off at people in Washington who do that to them. But think of this. Suppose a state refuses to enforce an unfunded mandate. Okay, the federal government can cut off some money to it, but it's already saving money by not enforcing the unfunded mandate. But secondly, think about what Sam Adams said at the time of the Boston Tea Party. Now, the Boston Tea Party, a lot of people think tea had become prohibitively expensive and people got ticked off. No, actually what happened was that through various relaxations of regulatory measures, the British have been able to reduce the price of tea, even with the unconstitutional tax on it. And so it was a test to see, are Americans willing to sell out their whole cause and go along with this tax just because they can get some cheap tea? And that's what Sam Adams asked, what type of people are we? Are we going to be diverted from our noble cause by some cheap tea? And that's what we have to ask ourselves here, is what type of people we ultimately want to be. And in California, with this medical marijuana issue, we've seen what happens when the federal government says, hey, you can't do this. Angel Rach was the woman who ultimately had her case brought to the Supreme Court. This is a woman who loses a pound of weight a day if she doesn't use this remedy. No other remedy has helped, has given her side effects that are even worse. The Ninth Circuit admitted this in 2007, admitted that she's likely to die without it, and yet the court said the federal government does not acknowledge a right to the use of medical marijuana for the alleviation of excruciating pain and suffering. That's what the court said. And so the Ninth Circuit came down against them in 2007, the Supreme Court in 2005, the Justice Department was having raids, and yet it's still going on. There are probably 1,000 dispensaries functioning in complete defiance of the federal will in LA County alone. So nullification is a way for the states to say to the federal government, we in this state believe in this cause, and we're willing to suffer the penalties associated with it. We're willing to resist. And so, you know, maybe you have to figure whether this is a battle worth fighting or not. Now, of course, some of you, I'm sure, have heard about these Firearms Freedom Acts in some of the states where they're passing laws that are saying that if you try to engage in unconstitutional gun regulation of guns that are manufactured in our state and have never left our state, don't try to tell us that this is interstate commerce, because only an idiot would buy that explanation. The gun, you know, what if I made it myself? It's still in my hand. It never left the state. I mean, come on. We're not going to enforce that. We're not going to allow it to be enforced. Wyoming has just introduced a law that would in fact impose penalties on federal agents attempting to enforce a law. I need to bring this to a close. There are many examples I could give you of states that are expressly, when they're doing this, acknowledging the reserved rights under the 10th Amendment in the course of doing it. They're not just doing it as a sort of inchoate act of civil disobedience. They're making it very clear that it's civil disobedience in line with the Constitution, so as to really stick it in their eyes. And even Kansas, socially conservative Kansas, has a measure now before its state legislature on the medical marijuana issue that says this is a reserved right under the 10th Amendment. I mean, it just goes on. There's so many examples. Legal tender, bring the National Guard home when it's sent on missions that have nothing to do with what the National Guard is for. All these sorts of things. And this is not even a left-right issue. It's, do you want to be a normal American or do you want to be an imperial American who's dictated to by some distant empire? That's what the question ultimately comes down to. And yes, it's true. If you support this idea, Keith Olbermann is going to smear you. But you know, if you don't support it, he's going to smear you anyway. So let's at least give him a hard time.